Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining. My name is Malvika Darwatkar, and I'm the director of the mentoring program here at Mission MathMinds. If this is your first time with us, Mission MathMinds is a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to bridging the gender gap for all people in STEM. And we do this through volunteering events, donations, and events featuring keynote speakers and female role models. With over 1,000 volunteers, we've managed to reach over 20,000 women and young girls across the world, and we hope to continue doing so in the coming years. Today, we welcome Anusha Thotakura. As a graduate of both the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, she's a leader in systemic change and political advocacy. Anusha began teaching as a bilingual middle school math teacher in the California Bay Area, later transitioning to policy after being inspired by the systemic issues affecting her students and the need for change. Today, she works as the executive director of Citizen Action Illinois, the largest and oldest progressive policy and political coalition, where she's been working with countless working families by passing legislation, building coalitions, and working with legislators, and has won over half a dozen winning campaigns for the school board and state representative in Illinois. Most recently, she was a candidate for the CPS School Board of Education election, championing a holistic approach to improving Chicago's education systems. She's also an associate board member of Chicago Debates and is a volunteer coach at CPS schools. We're so grateful and lucky to have her here today and to learn from her experiences. Anusha, do you want to give a quick introduction before we continue with the questions?
Hi, I don't know if my camera's working. Oh, I love my background.
Yeah,
Oh, I
looks
didn't realize
great.
the default background. Very cute. Malvika, thank you so much for the introduction. My name's Anusha, pronouns she, her. I don't think I have anything else to add from the introduction that you had. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're so grateful to have you here, and I can't wait to get to learn more about you as we go through this. So, I think my first question for you is, can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how it shaped your interest in politics and then influenced your passion for education and equity?
That's a great question because I think all of us are affected by our upbringing and the background that we have. A little bit about myself, my parents moved here from India and I was born here. I'm an older sibling. I have a younger brother who's 5 years younger than me. And the number one factor that influenced where my parents decided to move when they moved here, like where they wanted to settle down, was where me and my brother would have access to great public schools. Because for them, education was a huge factor in their life and that affected their opportunities, especially to come here. And they wanted to make sure that my brother and I would never have any barriers related to education. The classic immigrant stories, oh, I had to walk 4 miles in the heat and cross a river or something like that to go and come back from school. My parents were no different. And so I took education as something that was very serious to me growing up. Also, my aunt, she was a teacher in India. She retired recently, but growing up, I would go visit her in the summers and I would sit on her classroom floor where they did not have air conditioning. They barely had fans. And I was like, oh no, at least my school isn't like this. And I was very grateful for everything that I had, in the northwest suburbs of Chicago and Palatine, where I'm from. So from that point, like I definitely did not take my education for granted and I really valued education. And it was like a deep value for me that I think everyone should have access to education, no matter where they come from, no matter what income their family has, everyone deserves access to great education. So I would say that that definitely has influenced my values.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. We grow up with the perception, oh, like there's a lot of work when we grow up in school, but education is something that's really valuable and that whoever has it is very lucky to have. So it's really interesting to see how your background kind of shaped that passion. Um, so when you began your career as a bilingual middle school math teacher, you witnessed systemic issues affecting students. Can you share a specific experience that motivated your shift from teaching to policy and advocacy?
Yeah, so I had an inkling that I wanted to do policy work before I started teaching, but I thought I wanted to do education policy work specifically. And it kind of resonated with me. I'd heard some people talk about, like, that did education policy, talk about how, there's a lot of people that do education policy that have no experience teaching whatsoever and no experience in a classroom whatsoever. Not just as a teacher, but in any other way that like you could actually see the issues that are affecting students on a day-to-day basis. And so that's made me kind of interested in teaching in the first place. And that's how I started considering that path. But beyond just education policy, I mean, everything intersects with education. I taught in the Bay Area where there's high rates of housing insecurity, a lot of gentrification, large immigrant populations, and higher poverty rates as well. And so when kids don't have access to stable housing, it's hard for them to be focused in school. When kids don't know where their next meal is coming from, it's hard for them to be focused in school. If kids are having domestic violence issues at home, again, it is hard for them to be focused in school. So I saw as a teacher all these different issues affecting my kids, and some of my kids affected by multiple issues at the same time. And that got me more interested in not just education policy, but all the other issues that affect education and kids' abilities to be present in the classroom. You know, you need to be healthy, you need to have a roof over your head, your family, you need to have economic security. And those are all interconnected because I strongly believe that education can be a great equalizer for people, right? That's part of my own story. But your access to education is also defined by economic stability and health access and all these other issues as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like education is something that's important. Like we need to have access to it, but there are other factors involved. So, hearing you talk about like witnessing those students and understanding those systemic issues affecting them, it's very important to understand that those factors also play a role in education. So, as you're talking about those systemic issues, a lot of your work emphasized addressing those systemic issues like housing, food, and economic insecurity. So, how do you approach creating policies that tackle these interconnected challenges?
I mean, it's really hard. And I think that, whenever there's a problem, you try to do a root cause analysis of, well, why does this happen? What could prevent this? And you're never going to be able to, in one fell swoop, do like a full policy that addresses the root cause and solves all the problems that we see on a day-to-day basis. But what you can do is think about how the issue that you're trying to solve intersects with other issues and other people who could be impacted. So you can mobilize everyone in a broad coalition to pass the policy that you're trying to advance. So I'll give an example. One of the issues that is happening right now is at the federal level with proposed cuts to Medicaid, SNAP, which are like food
Yeah.
stamps, Department of Education, Social Security, all of these different things. And there's a lot of groups that focus on one of those specific issues, whether it is like a food bank that cares about SNAP funding, or a hospital that cares about Medicaid funding, or schools that care about Department of Education funding. But my role as an organizer is to think about how are all these issues connected and how can we all work together and bring people together to have like a unified message so that no one does like whack-a-mole and says, oh, well, I'll actually cut this instead of that. And then still the same kids are affected, right? The same kids that are serviced by schools that have funding for transportation, for example, or students with disabilities. It's the same communities that are affected by Medicaid funding, same communities that are serviced by food banks. So I think keeping the people at the forefront and understanding that the intersections of the issues helps people organize with coalitions that address all the different issues.
Wow, I never realized that all of those like issues tended to come together in one spot, but it really opens up your eyes when I hear you talk about it. So I want to transition into talking about your role as executive director of Citizen Action in Illinois. So I'm kind of asking for a few more examples, but what have been some of the most impactful campaigns that you've led to support working families?
We've done a lot of work on healthcare in recent years, especially prescription drug affordability. So the first bill that I was involved in was 2 years ago. It was a bill to ban price gouging of certain types of medication. So if you remember, like, I don't know how many years ago at this point, but there is this Pharma Bro case where there
Yeah.
was a medication that costs like pennies on the dollar to produce, that was being sold at like a 3,000% increase, like I don't know, hundreds of dollars the next day. And eventually what that guy, the farmer bro guy, Martin Shkreli, he was prosecuted for under like antitrust laws, but there was no actual law that prevented the price gouging itself. that was completely legal. We have no laws about that. And you also see price gouging like after natural disasters where like the price of water will go up, like for bottled water. And there's no laws. I think there's like, again, some antitrust laws there, but not really any price gouging laws in the book. So we had a bill that focused just on generic and off-patent medication, which means that these are supposed to be cheaper alternatives to other more expensive brand name medication. They've recouped their money from research and development because they're off-patent. So that shouldn't be the case that they're charging so much money. And those medications should be on a list of drugs that will be monitored to make sure that they're not being price gouged. And so that was a bill that one of the first ones I worked on and passed in 2020. I can't even remember, 2023, I guess. Yeah, 2 years ago, and signed into law a few months after. So like literally summer of 2023. And it's one of those, like, it's a peace of mind bill. Did it reverse already expensive medication? No. But when you see stories like that, or you see other people who share stories of, oh, my medication was $5 and the next month they change it to 500. That's the kind of law that gives people at least a peace of mind that that won't happen to them, on top of already the burdens that they may face in affording their medication or their rent or their groceries. They have peace of mind that their medication will not triple in price overnight.
Yeah, no, because medication is just like a very, very big necessity, and to have those alternatives available to constituents from those other communities is very important. So it's great to hear about the work that you've done, and hopefully we see more and more of those campaigns coming as the years go by. So recently you were running for the Chicago Board of Education to represent District 6. So in this time, did you encounter any gender specific challenges during your campaign? And if so, how did you navigate them?
I think the most common gender specific challenge I would say is that a lot of people would ask me if I have kids in the schools and if that's why I was running, which was like, okay, I'm 26, maybe I will have to have a kid or something, but I that's one of those questions where I don't think that people were intending for it to be, discriminatory based on gender. But I'm sure that if I were a man, people would not be asking, oh, like, do you have a
Yeah.
kid? Like, is that why you're running? And I will say that, after I shared a little bit about my experience as a teacher and how I'm still involved with schools, my work in policy, like they were less like, oh, well, if you don't have a kid, then you should be running. But it was more like people were curious why I was interested in the first place. And because for a lot of people, it is that they have kids at the schools. So maybe that I don't think that I saw much else that I would attribute, but for any type of women candidate, whether it's for myself or anyone running for any office, women tend to get scrutinized for certain characteristic traits, whether it's for being too aggressive or too soft. There's like a very narrow window in the middle where there's like a
Mhm.
lack of scrutiny for women, or how women are dressed, the tone that women use. Like those are types of things that are a lot more scrutinized for women candidates than they are for men, for sure. So um, yeah, I can't think of any like specific instances where someone said anything, but I was definitely asked all the time about if I have kids.
Wow. I mean, it's sad that you had to have to validate that with your other experiences, because I'm sure the experience would have been different if you perhaps had a different gender. But obviously, like as well qualified as you are, it's sad that those issues still exist out there. But hopefully, with your work and the work of others, we can continue to combat those issues and see more space for women driving change in policy and advocacy. So, within your CPS campaign, what were some of the largest issues you were advocating for within your campaign?
The number one issue is increased funding. CPS suffers from a huge structural deficit, and like our schools are underfunded according to the state's own funding formula. We need an additional $1 billion of funding just to be at adequacy for CPS. And what that means when we're not at adequacy means that we're cutting programs that are essential for students, whether it's after school programs or arts programs. We're cutting transportation for students, for buses to get to and from school. Those are the kinds of things that are not optional, but have already been cut from our schools. And the only way to change that is make sure that we get additional revenue, especially from the state. But it's not like our state has a huge piggy bank that they're hiding money somewhere either. there's a funding issue that we have, and now federal funding is being threatened. So we need to do what we can to make sure that CPS kids get the funding that our kids deserve, and also kids across the state. Suburban districts, downstate districts, all need more school funding to make sure that our kids have what they need to be successful. And no matter what other issue I can talk about, it does tie back to funding. Like special education services, we need funding for that. Early childhood education, we need funding. After school programs, we need funding. So the through line is we need funding. And the way to do that is to go down to Springfield and build relationships and make the case for CPS kids.
Yeah, no, definitely. Actually, like I take an introduction to education class, and we were going over like how does a school's budgeting process work. So really opened my eyes to see like, oh, like if you give money towards maybe transportation, will you have enough for textbooks and other supplies? Like, how do you make sure that all of those needs are met? And yeah, it's to continue increasing funding. But yeah, making those connections would definitely be a strong way to go, and hopefully with a lot more work, we can continue to get that funding for CPS schools. It's very enlightening to hear about those funding issues. And specifically at Mission MathMinds, we work to direct school funding towards evidence-based STEM programs. So can you talk about more of the process of how the school board decides where the funding goes?
Yeah, so the board approves a budget that is assembled by CPS staff and senior leadership.
Mhm.
So we are more like signing off on a budget, and we get to voice our opinions on what we would like to see prioritized in the budget. And the district works closely with the board to develop a strategic plan. So we released a strategic plan last year with goals in like 5 different areas about what we want to see within the next 5 years.
Yeah,
And the budget should reflect those things because a budget is the way that we resource those plans and those goals. So the district presents, it's not like the board goes together, like puts a line by line budget,
yeah,
but we take a look at the budget as presented to us and then we decide whether or not to approve it.
wow. So, wow, that's like a lot to take in as I'm thinking about it. Now that it's been a few months since your campaign ended, what's next for you in regards to advocating for change at the Chicago Board of Education? And what did you learn from the process of campaigning overall?
I mean, definitely a lot learned. I think anyone can learn a lot, whether you're a volunteer on a campaign or a candidate. There's a lot to learn, especially for me. You know, I ran in Chicago. I'm not from Chicago, I'm from the suburbs. So it's a
Mhm.
huge learning process of a new community to learn the issues here because I didn't go to CPS. But you know, I can still understand from listening to people and having the thousands of conversations that I did have about the issues that are important to people and what I can do. So what's next is like translating those conversations into actions and seeing how I can be like actual representative for people and the issues that they care about. What you'll see in an organization as big as CPS is that there's a lot of, oh, well, this is just how we do things. That's how they've always been done. And you know, well, how I see my job as a board member is to parse through, okay, well, how much of that is actually set in stone
Wow.
versus how much of that can actually be changed and what is it going to take to change those things. Because as with any organization, there's always going to be resistance to change. You know, people are used to doing things how they're done. That's what's comfortable, but that's not necessarily what's best. And
Yeah.
that is how I see my job as trying to bridge that gap between where we are and where we can go.
Yeah, making change is definitely the way to go. It's hard, but it'll definitely bring a lot for us in the future. Now, I'm sure during your campaign you talked to a lot of different types of constituents. So, what type of concerns did constituents have about a candidate like yourself regarding factors like your race, gender? How do these core factors affect people's perception of you?
I mean, that's a like huge question. So like my last name is not a very common last name. I don't know if you've met any other Thotacors, and if you have, they're probably my cousins or something. But I you know got a lot of comments about, oh, like what an interesting name that were positive and also not so positive. And one thing that's very common for candidates of color, this is the advice that I will give to anyone, this is advice that I've gotten multiple times, is that you have to be seen by other people in order to earn their trust. You know, someone else, another candidate of a different demographic may be able to get away with just doing phone calls or text messages or mail. But as a candidate of color, people are not likely to just trust you based off of a message that comes from someone that's not you. They need to see you. They need to hear from you. They need you to be able to answer their questions. And I was running in a district with 300,000 people. It's very hard for me to get to every single inch and
Yeah.
corner of the district. And we had a shorter timeline because this is the first ever school board elections in Chicago. So we only
Yeah.
had like a, maybe like a 4-month campaign period,
Oh, wow.
really, compared to, maybe like a year and a half would be a regular timeline. So I think that truncated timeline, it limited the number of people that I was able to reach. But even with the work that I did in those few months, I was able to learn a lot. And the advice that I would give anyone is like, it was a lot of work. It was a ton of work. But I still learned something from it at the end of the day. And, to be clear, I was unsuccessful in my election. And I was fortunate enough to be appointed by the mayor afterward because it's a hybrid, half elected, half appointed board.
Yeah.
But even before I was appointed, I still felt like it was a great experience for me to have run the campaign, learned what I had learned, even if there was no possibility of me serving on the school board. And now that I am on the school board, I'm like, well, definitely it was worth it because of all the things that I learned on the campaign trail about the issues that are affecting communities and how that helps me in my current role. But regardless, there's so much that you can learn from being a part of a campaign, whether it's you yourself running or you're helping someone else.
Yeah. Man, the amount of work you guys got done within 4 months, it's such a short time frame, but I know that you and the rest of the people on your campaign put in a lot of work. So definitely something to be very proud of. And it's great to hear that you learned a lot from it too. So can you talk about what your work has been since surrounding what your work has been surrounding since the campaign after being appointed?
Yeah, so there's a lot of issues coming in front of the school board. So there's certain things that have to come in front of the board, like contracts above a certain dollar amount, like hiring, firing of certain personnel. Those are the types of issues that will come up in front of the board no matter what. And right now, some of the issues, like there was a several charter schools that were going to be closed in Chicago, and the board passed a resolution back in December to keep some of them open, to try to keep some of them open. So that was probably the most contentious thing that came for a vote a couple weeks ago about keeping additional schools open. And in the coming weeks, we'll have a budget amendment that's coming up to fix our budget for the current fiscal year. And then after that, we have another budget hole, potentially $600 million deficit for the next fiscal year that we'll need to start working on in the next few months. So, those kinds of things. And then within that, prioritizing what, like, as you mentioned, how do you decide what gets funded and what doesn't? Those are the kinds of decisions that we'll need to make of where can we be more efficient with our resources, what can we prioritize for funding, who is that going to impact, and that doesn't happen in just one board meeting. That happens in multiple conversations, many conversations with many different stakeholders over the course of several months.
Yeah, it's hard because there's so many schools involved in the CPS system. So working to keep every individual school open takes a lot of effort in deciding like where funding gets allocated. Um, so what made you run for the Chicago Board of Education rather like a local board? Because you mentioned you come from the suburbs. We at MathMinds, we know you through your work at Illinois Representative Syed's campaign efforts, but why did you believe the Board of Education is where the most work was needed to be done?
So I live in Chicago. I'm a registered voter in Chicago. And so the only place I'm eligible to run is like in Chicago. And what we have in Chicago is this thing called local school councils. It's a unique thing where every school has like a mini school board, but it doesn't have the full powers of a school board. They get to
Yeah.
approve spending on with certain dollar limit thresholds. And they also get to hire and fire the principal. They also do get updates about goals and progress and things like that at the school level. So it's made up of community representatives, parents, teachers, other staff, and each school has one, and they're elected by like the school community. I had thought about running for local school council before for like my local area. I mean, I wouldn't even have to run because there's a lot of vacancies for different schools for the community representative position, but it didn't align with this timeline I had to go to Springfield for work to go lobby and do advocacy work down there. But when I saw that the Board of Education was going to be elected for the first time, I was like, okay, well, let me help somebody run. I've helped Representative Syed run before. I've helped what is like 6 out of 7 of the members of the District 211 board be elected. And so I was looking to see who I could help. But then when I looked at the candidates, I was like, oh, I would not want to vote for any of these people myself. And
Yeah.
so I kind of waited and I was like, okay, well, if no one's going to run, like I could run. And then I ran that by some people. I was like, what do you think? They were like, well, I don't know anybody running in that area either. So
Mhm.
that's kind of how I started because I was like, I know what to do. I could do it. I know the work that's involved. I could do it. And that's how I made the decision. So it was a pretty quick turnaround. I think like within a few weeks, I decided to run.
Oh, wow. It's inspiring, because, we expect to just like sit with the choices that we have. Like you saw the options as the other candidates, but you decided to take that change upon yourself and be the change you want to see. So it's really great to hear about that. You were talking about the mini school boards, I think that you said every individual school has. Is that an approach that you think other schools should take, like in the suburbs?
Well, CPS is so huge. Like we have 500 schools.
Mhm.
So I think like in Chicago, it's like a uniquely needed structure to make sure that the community has some type of voice in the decisions that affect their kids and their community. Like, in 211, how many schools are there? Like eight or something like that. It's not as needed, in my opinion. I think that there definitely could be benefits to that level of engagement. But in Chicago, where you have a lot of decisions that are made at the top, at CPS central office, that people were demanding accountability for. I mean, the local school council structure started like a few decades ago. It's not like it's always been there with CPS. It was a
Yeah.
result of community demands for transparency and accountability and input into CPS. Because for a very long time, there were decisions that were made to close schools, or dismantle school systems in certain parts of the city that the community had no input into. So that's where the local school council structure comes from. I'll also say that the structure only works to the extent that people are able to participate in it. So you have a lot of local school councils that have vacancies. They don't meet a quorum, and so they can't even meet. And so the principal
Mhm.
might end up making decisions unilaterally anyway. So you have different kinds of barriers. If you have meetings that don't allow people who work during the school day to participate, that's a problem. If you don't have linguistically inclusive meetings, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So those are all other barriers. It's not a perfect system, but I do think that it works well for a lot of communities.
Yeah, especially for like those larger school systems to make sure that individual communities have a voice. Yeah, really interesting. So, transitioning back to your time as a teacher, can you talk about your experience becoming a teacher and talk about the school and community you were impacting?
Yes. So I did Teach for America, which I would not recommend to everyone. I think that, even at the time that I was considering whether or not to do Teach for America, it was very controversial. And I went back and forth for a very long time. And my reflection is that there's no way that I could have done what I did without Teach for America. But I do think that the system that for those unfamiliar with it, like it's like, Peace Corps. You apply, it's a highly selective program, and they place you in a high needs area that really needs a teacher. At the same time, a lot of the schools that Teach for America places into rely on Teach for America teachers because those teachers will not last that long. So think about schools like I've seen schools where over 80% of the teachers are Teach for America. So they will only be there for maybe 2 years. Some of them maybe 3 years. They'll stay an extra year. And the system relies on that because they burn the teachers out so much, and they treat teachers like they're replaceable because they know that there'll be more Teach for America teachers coming in. So that's like the pros and the cons of, they help
Mhm.
perpetuate a system where there's a teacher shortage because there's a pipeline of replacements. But at the same time, I did not have to get a degree in education to teach what I taught. And I don't think I needed it. I taught middle school math. I knew enough math to do that.
Yeah.
Um, that's kind of how I ended up there. I taught in San Jose, California, which is a lower income. I taught on the southeast side, so like lower income community. I taught at a bilingual school. I taught math, which I didn't have to teach in Spanish, but I had some kids that only spoke Spanish, so sometimes that's what it would be. And I taught there for 2 years. And my last year teaching was like part of the pandemic, so like a
Wow.
third of that was remote.
Yeah. So you'd agree that for a person to be involved with programs like Teach for America, you have to be you have to be able to maybe not know everything that's going on all the time and also like move around a lot.
I think so. I think that like for example, like there's when I taught in the Bay Area, like I still know people from Teach for America that are still teaching. It's a way to get in the classroom and people will potentially stay. And it's maybe more cost effective way to get into teaching than other routes that can be incredibly cost prohibitive, which is another issue. And there's, I think, what I would caution against is that a lot of people do it because they think that it'll be like fun or something. Like it's not fun. It's not fun. If you didn't go to an under-resourced school growing up, like you don't know what it's like to
Yeah.
teach in some of these schools. Like it is, you have kids that are dealing with a lot of different traumas. You have schools that are completely under-resourced. Like it's not, oh, let me go teach and do a little poverty tour or something in a different community. That is what I would highly recommend against. And anyone that thinks that's what it is ends up needing to quit, right? Like whether it's you quit during training or you quit after a couple months, it will be really hard. I would say that if you are genuinely interested in the teaching part, like you think you would really enjoy that piece of it, that's like the way to go into it. I love teaching middle school math. I still think sometimes I'm like, wow, I mean, am I ever going to be as happy as I was teaching like ratios and percentages? Um, and I still get to work with kids. Like I volunteer as a middle school debate coach. So I still get to have that like type of fulfillment and satisfaction of working with kids. But it's not a decision that I would take lightly. I think if you want to like have fun or whatever, do some tutoring on the side or something like that. But the decision to be a teacher, it's really sensitive because a lot of kids live in communities that are low income, they're used to teachers quitting on them. Like that is a thing that is internalized of, I'm really hard to work with, or my class is really hard to work with. Nobody wants to work with us. Nobody wants to be with us. So think about the impact that it has on kids when you decide that you're not capable of working with them. It's a very heavy decision to make, to decide to be at a school. It's a commitment. There are points where I was like, it was really horrible and really tough my first year, but I was not going to quit. Like that was not an option for me. So think about that.
Yeah, you mentioned that, a lot of the students in these underprivileged areas, like they're going through other systemic issues that are separate from a lack of quality education. So having a committed teacher who's there for the teaching part, not necessarily to just have fun, is very important. I definitely agree with that. So when you were in this program, or just as a teacher in general, what about your teaching style was unique to adapt to these really different situations that these kids had at any of your schools?
I think the number one thing is like relationship building with both the kids, but also their parents. Like that was something that I thought was a little weird because I was like, I don't remember my teachers talking to my parents that much. We would just do like parent teacher conferences a couple times a
Yeah.
year. But what I saw was that other really successful teachers at my school were constantly engaging with parents, letting them know, like, especially the tougher kids, like letting them know that they did a great job at school, or,
Mhm.
sending them a picture of some work that they did, like giving them praise and all that kind of positive relationship building, so that if something negative were to happen, that's not the first time you're reaching out to a parent. So that was a strategy that I thought was great and that I picked up.
Yeah, it's really great to get to know everyone who's involved with the student, not just the student. It really makes for an easier balance between home and school life. During my intro to education class, we've heard a lot about different crazy teacher student stories, but also just very incredible ones. So I wanted to know, what was the most unique moment you had with a student, or a very unique moment?
I don't know about a unique moment, but I still stay in touch with a lot of the kids that I taught, and I think
Great.
that's a great like
Mhm.
experience that I had. And I get to have those relationships because I didn't have that many students. I only taught for 2 years. So I actually I remember all their names, like I remember all things about them, and I'm still able to stay in touch. So, I have some kids that will still hit me up for math help. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I could help with pre-algebra, algebra, but now you're at calculus and I, can't do much there, but I'll try to do what I can. So I think that having a trusted adult in a kid's life, like that can make a huge difference for them. And that's what I try to be.
No, yeah, that's great. Um, Through these under-resourced schools, I'm sure we can agree that a lot of the issues present stem from systemic issues. So, what did you notice about these admins when it came to supporting these students?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of your question?
Oh, sorry. I said, what did you notice about these admins when it came? Sorry, administrative individuals, like when it came to supporting these students, like in the schools.
I think in general, like there are a lot of structural issues with our education system, and even administrators have a lot of different priorities that will differ from the priorities of even teachers, and will differ from the priorities of central office. Like I think that we need to be making sure that our administrators are supported, and that our teachers are supported, because at the end of the day, when you have like empowered and happy teachers and you have empowered and happy administrators, that really affects the school culture.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's a relationship between both the students and the teachers. So, what was the biggest lesson that you learned while you were a teacher that you used to apply when you were running for the Board of Education?
It's a great question. I think listening. I think
Mhm.
a lot of people think that, the politician stereotype is like you talk and talk and talk a lot. And that, I guess that is what I've been doing today, but that's what I'm supposed to be doing, answering questions. But I think the best thing you can do is like ask questions and listen. And that was a skill that I developed during teaching for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's great to show people that you're listening to their concerns. So, overall, like in your journey of this campaign and becoming involved in politics in general, who are some of the biggest influences you had or female mentors?
That's a great question. I would say one of my good friends, Representative Syed, who is my inspiration, from the time that she decided to run back in 2022 to like actually being elected. She just works so hard. Like
Yeah.
that is an inspiration that I don't think anyone really recognizes how hard she works. It's one thing just to like, oh, be a politician, like to run for office, put your name on some signs and like then be elected and like be in Springfield. She actually works so hard. Like I would see her doing constituent meetings all day from like 9 to 5, and then after 5 p.m. knock on doors until the sun goes down.
Oh my
Like
God.
from like 5 to 8:30 or whatever during the summer. And I was like, well, if she can work that hard, then maybe I can work similarly hard. Or, she'll be doing fundraising calls all day and then knock on doors after that. And like that is a kind of commitment and dedication that she shows both on the campaign side, but then also on the legislator side, like doing all of those constituent meetings. So her hard work and dedication is always inspirational for me.
Oh, absolutely. When I tell you that both me and a lot of members of my community are just in awe of the work she does, like I could go on and on about it. And um, I used to be in debate at Friend High School, so she would actually come and coach sometime when she was still running for state representative. So, seeing her go back and forth and still have time to coach students and also like work on her campaign, it's so inspiring. Definitely have to agree with you there. So at Mission MathMinds, we pride ourselves on an initiative we like to call Female Role Models. This is where we connect young girls with global female leaders of all types of fields. So can you talk about finding the importance of a female mentor in politics?
Yeah, I would say that when you think about a mentor, like it doesn't have to be formal. You never have to go to somebody and say like, "Oh, will you be my mentor?" But like they're think about the people that you view as thought partners, like whose opinion you value, whose advice you value. And something that's been important for me is like finding people who make the impossible possible. Like there's always going to be people that tell you, oh, sorry, that's going to be really hard to do, or I don't know if this is the right time for that. People that will try to do reality checks. For me, I need the opposite. I need someone that will like validate the crazy part of my brain that's like, oh, what if this worked out, or what if we did this?
Mhm.
And that's why I really value Representative Syed, because she is someone who has made the impossible possible, through her work. And that's a quality I try to look for in other people. So think about, what is a type of perspective that you're seeking from others, and maybe it's to voice those parts of you that are a little quieter that you want a sounding board for, and to look for people that emulate those values, because it can't just be any other person. It can't be like, oh well, that person's like successful, whatever I think that
Yeah.
success is, so that's who I'm going to seek out to be my mentor, because success can be very different for different people. Try to find someone to connect with that has the perspectives and values that you're trying to bring out in yourself, not necessarily like the person that has all the outcomes that you want to see, because you'll get to the outcomes if you bring out the values and perspectives.
Yeah. And what you're saying, like, you're not necessarily going to find that female mentor right away or any mentor right away. So it's important to make sure that like you you kind of connect with them in more ways than one, not just based on success. Yes, I very important. In the last decade, we've actually seen a lot more women run for higher level political positions across the country. But despite this, we still see major issues that women are working to combat. So, what specific barriers do you think women still face in political leadership today?
I mean, one of the big things is like stigma around like having kids and running for office. You know, you start
Yeah.
to see a little bit more of that. Like our Senator Duckworth, she will still do campaign events with her kids sometimes, and she's talked about the importance of that. Like sometimes I think I've seen her kid like on the floor of the U.S.
Mhm.
House, like, but it's still like, oh wow, like she's got her kid with her, and no one has any questions about where the men have their kids if they're at home or
Yeah.
whatever. So I think that's a really big issue. And especially with women, not even just like doing a lot of the child related labor in the household, but all the other domestic labor that women take on. It becomes harder for women to take on leadership roles, even if they are elected, to then want to run for a higher office because of some of the stigmas there. So I think that's a huge thing. And also just the type of scrutiny that women get even once you're elected. You know, I talk about the scrutiny for women candidates. Even after you're elected, there's a lot more like highlighting of women's flaws and insecurities
Mhm.
when they're considering running for higher office and that kind of thing that I think you know men don't have to face. So I think doing what we can to take away the stigma of like working mothers specifically and addressing those issues would go a long way in making sure we have representation at higher levels.
Yes, the desire to have a family and have like a separate life from politics should not be a reason that women should be hindered from continuing advocacy, definitely.
Mhm.
So, looking ahead, how do you plan to address ongoing challenges related to equity and inclusion?
I mean, that's all of the work, right? Like
Mhm.
when you think about, especially about Chicago, Chicago has a horrible history of redlining and segregation
Yeah.
in our city that has also led to the schools in historically disinvested and redline neighborhoods being a lot lower quality than other neighborhoods. So Black students and Latino students in CPS get a lot fewer access like to resources than white students do. And that is like the underlying foundation of how our public school system was built. Even if you think about the suburbs and the reliance of our school system on property taxes, well, where are property values higher and where are school systems getting more funding? So that's at the root of every issue that you can think of as inequitable funding that is tied back to inequities and redlining. So how to reverse that? I mean, there's a lot to do, and again goes back to the intersections. One of
Mhm.
the things that I'm working on is sustainable schools, specifically around clean energy and solar panels at CPS and air quality. I volunteer at a school on the Southwest side that's in a neighborhood with some of the worst air quality in all of Chicago. You know, you got like factories polluting God knows what into the air. That's the air that our kids are breathing. That's the air that our teachers are breathing. And those are already the areas that are hit hard by like income inequality, that are going to have health disparities because of the air, and that affects kids' ability to learn when it affects their cognitive abilities because of the air that they're breathing in. So everything that we do, we have to have an equity lens. An equity lens isn't just about like, oh well, does this affect, is it just about race, but it's everything. How does it affect kids along the lines of race, gender, income, special education, language status? All of those things have to be considered together.
Yeah, I mean, the work just never stops, that's for sure. In political spaces over the next decade, what changes would you like to see?
I think being more inclusive of younger folks, you know, there has been a large shift in younger people running for office, but that needs to be continued for sure. You know, one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of people are like, "Oh, you're too young to be on the school board or whatever." But now that I'm on the school board, well, guess what? I'm also the person that's most recently been in school, so I can learn a lot, a lot of things
Yeah.
at a pace that's maybe different from other people because I've done this more recently. So I think there's a lot of benefits. And it's not just about, oh, having younger people is better, but having diversity of people in
Mhm.
any room is always better. And that includes having young people.
Yeah, right now we see like there's an overwhelming majority of maybe older individuals who are working in campaigning. So having that diversity ensures that we get voices from all generations because there's a lot of different perspectives that we have on different issues. So it's important to hear all of those and make sure that we have a unified decision. So my last question to you is, what advice would you give to young people, especially women, who want to get involved in politics or advocacy?
I would say that there's it's never a bad time to start and there's never a bad place to start. And you can always do some cold outreach. So if you're like, I don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
get started, but I do like this one person's campaign, maybe they're looking for volunteers, but I don't see a volunteer form on their website. Just reach out. You never know where that will take you. And people are also always willing to help. Like, especially for women in politics, there's always a way to get involved, whether it's through an organization, through a
Mm-hmm.
candidate, through a community group. Like, there's some way for you to get involved, and there's never a bad time. Like one of my first internships, like I emailed this random form on like Senator Duckworth's website, and then I got a
Oh,
response back a couple weeks later saying, yeah, sure, we'll hire you as a unpaid intern to do like finance research. And so that's what I did when I was in high school. So take whatever opportunity you can to do what you want to do. And you can also like make your own path, right? Like if someone doesn't have an opportunity already posted, you can say, well, this is what I'm interested in. Can I do that? And people a lot more often than you would think are willing to work with you in your interests.
no, yeah, definitely. And like we see a lot of high school students or even middle school students like going through the same thing you were talking about, like cold emailing. So what you're saying, I think really gives them the motivation to keep going on because you may not get a response at first, but if you keep going, you could get lucky. You could get an opportunity. So yeah, thank you so much, Anusha. I think we're gonna open it up to the Q&A right now. I think we have some. I think I'll read out the questions and then do you want to just like answer them?
That sounds good. And do you mind if I turn my camera off? I'm about to head to another meeting, but I will take the questions as they come up.
Yeah, yeah, whatever works. Yeah. Okay, so the first question was, what are the most important bills being talked about related to education reform?
I think the federal stuff is most important right now, especially related to Department of Education cuts. That's where our students with disabilities get funding. That's where we get transportation for things like busing. Um, Also, that's where we have funding for things like Pell for students to get scholarships and financial assistance. So definitely, that's what there is to watch right now.
Great. Okay, next question. What made you take the initiative to teach in another language?
So I took Spanish in high school, and when you do Teach for America, like if you apply, you have to fill out a form that like ranks your preferences, but then also what your qualifications are. So I had to put in like, oh, how many years of math have I taken? How many years of different classes have I taken? What's the highest level of XYZ? And so I was sure, because I was an econ major and there's a shortage of math teachers, like especially high school math teachers across the country. I ranked DC first. So I thought I was going to get sent out to DC to teach high school math. But also somewhere on the form, I checked that I was proficient in Spanish. And so that's what I was assigned to do. I was assigned to teach Spanish
Wow.
because there's a huge need for Spanish speaking teachers in the Bay Area. So that's how I got assigned.
Wow. Um, wow, just like there's a lot of different options that you could have been handed, but the fact that you ended up with that, I wonder what things could have worked out, if things could have worked out differently, but that's cool. Okay, our next question, and attendees, if you have more questions, feel free to put it in the Q&A. Our next question was, some people argue that focusing on diversity and advocacy can become politicized. How do you navigate these conversations to keep the focus on creating equitable opportunities for all students?
Well, for me in my work, like I have no issue with things being politicized because I do work at a political advocacy group. And I think that there is a fear of politicizing things, but it's also values based, right? Like it's not about a specific individual, it doesn't have to be about Trump or somebody else, like another
Mhm.
politician, but it's a value about how you think that things should be and how things are and how to bridge the gap. So I think that there's like too much worry that people have around being political or issues being politicized. But standing up for what's right should never be seen as so political that you can't do it, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right, our next question. Looking ahead, what policy changes or community initiatives do you believe can make the most impact in creating lasting equity in education?
I think for sustainable change, what we need in our state at least is sustainable revenue, right? Like we had a proposal, what's called a progressive income tax or a fair tax that came up in 2020. What that is like our Illinois income tax is like a flat percentage rate. Like, I don't know, like 10 or 13%, something like that. Like everyone pays that same percent, which of course, that means if you make more money, you pay more money because the percent of something grows as that number grows. But in other states, they have what's called a graduated or a progressive income tax, meaning that as your tax bracket is higher, you pay a higher percentage. So that's, I believe, how the federal tax rates are as well. But the graduated income tax has to be approved by voters with a 60% approval on a ballot referendum. So in 2020, there was a question on the ballot of should Illinois change their flat tax structure to a graduated tax structure? And I think it got like 56% of the vote or something like that. So
Oh,
a majority, but not enough for it to change the Illinois state tax code. And without that, you're just never going to get the amount of money that you need to fund our social services, including public education. Right now, like there's a big fight between all different like services about who's going to get what funded, what cuts are going to be made. And in Chicago, there's been cuts to all kinds of programs at the expense of, you know, education for our kids because the pie that we're cutting from is too small. So I think the biggest thing we need to do is expand the pie so that we have more funding for all things, including schools.
you were talking about the votes being very close. Do you expect that opinion to shift later on in the future, or what do you think? What initiatives do you think can help shift that opinion?
That's a great question. I think that we have to keep trying no matter what. The reason it failed is because there was a very well-funded misinformation campaign saying that it was going to raise everybody's taxes, but it was only going to raise your taxes if you made more than like $300,000 or something, which
Mhm.
is like not a majority of people in Illinois. But there was
Yeah.
misinformation that it was going to raise everybody's taxes, and so of course people did not want to vote for that. Um, I think
Mhm.
something that could help next time is that, look, we should say what that is going to fund, right? Like in
Mhm.
my head, it makes sense to tie it to education because education is very underfunded in Illinois. And I think it's also very popular. People understand the need to fully fund public schools. But that wasn't done last time it was done. It didn't say what exactly the money was going to go towards. Because if you don't say it, then you could spend it on a lot of things. But there's also not that much trust in government that government is going to spend it well. But at least if you say education, like maybe that would increase trust that it would be spent well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think tying it to education, especially because education is the basis for a lot of economic opportunities for students and adults in the future, I think tying it to education will really be a motivator. Relating to education, the next question was, what made you pursue education after being an economics major in college?
I did both political science and economics, and I knew I wanted to do some type of like policy stuff after. So, yeah, it was like what I had shared before about, and then I wanted to do education policy, and then I didn't think it made sense that people do education policy without having been classroom teachers or having any classroom experience. So that's why I did that. And now, like on the board, there's a few of us that have teaching backgrounds. And of course, some people taught for a lot longer than I did.
Mhm.
But um, my experiences do resonate with their experiences. Like we can think about, oh, how would this impact a teacher in the classroom or a kid in a classroom? And the people who don't have that experience at all, like again, I only had 2 years of experience, but there's a huge disconnect between people that have never had that experience and the people like like myself that at least know what that is like, what the impact that a policy could have in a classroom.
Yeah, definitely. All right, and then I think the last question we're going to go with before ending here today. What are your ideas on combating misinformation in certain issues?
I mean, it starts with building critical thinking skills amongst our kids, right? Like right now, you have misinformation on social media, on TikTok, and there's a lack of social media literacy and media literacy in general that comes from a lack of critical thinking skills that are developed at school. And, you see a math teacher, I think math and logic, that's very closely related to critical thinking. And media literacy is related to general literacy skills. So it all starts with education, and the less educated a group of individuals is, the more likely it is to manipulate them and give them misinformation. So the best weapon we have against misinformation is investing in education.
Yeah, like I mean, as you said, education is the basis of it all. So investing in it will definitely support the future of children and students and adults alike. So I think that'll be a wrap up. Thank you all for joining this webinar today. And Anusha, thank you so much for giving your insight. It was such a pleasure to hear you talk about all of these issues and talk about your work. Before we end, I'm going to hand it off to our founder, Ruby, who's going to end us off.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys see me?
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. I just want to echo Malvika's words. Thank you so much to Anusha for leading us through this webinar. Truly, myself, I learned a lot about the political landscape, specifically in education reform, and I'm sure all of our attendees did as well. It's really great that we're able to host these webinars and have these virtual conversations because, especially during a time like this where so much is changing, not only locally but also nationally, it's really important that we're having conversations with our political leaders. So, once again, thank you so much to both Anusha, Malvika, and to all the attendees who joined tonight. I hope you learned a lot. You can go to missionmathminds.org to see a recording of this webinar in about a week. If you have any questions about contacting Anusha, you can check us out on Instagram or email us, and we'll happy to kind of connect you with her. So again, thank you to everyone. Hope you have a nice day.
And thank you all for having me.